Welcome to Unfiltered Flow ELSC, the podcast dedicated to the progression of the fluid power and automation industries. I'm Megan Cook. That's Alan Burdett. Today is our pleasure to have Miss Julie Fuller on the program. Again, this is 2.0. Julie is the Director of Product Management and Engineering at Hitachi Construction Machinery. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Megan and Alan. It's great to be back.
Nice to see you again.
So, Julie, for those that didn't see the first go around here, will you run through how you ended up in engineering and manufacturing and how much of that was planned versus luck?
Yeah, I guess maybe some of it was sort of inevitable just based on, my major and some other things. But yeah, we'll go through that. Did a degree in mechanical engineering for my university degree. A lot of reasons that kind of came together, but it was something I decided on sort of late in high school. Didn't know a lot of people that were engineers, didn't really have a lot of role models there, but I had some teachers in high school that sort of pointed me in that direction. And I got to try it out with a summer program at Tennessee Tech, which is where I ended up doing my degree as well, and thought, I'd really like it. And I guess I'll say coming out of college with a degree in engineering, engineering is an obvious place to use those skills. Certainly other ways that engineering degrees can benefit and be used by different types of groups and businesses, but certainly most of the jobs I was applying for were manufacturing. So, I guess I didn't really think about it going into engineering that it was going to end up being manufacturing. That wasn't necessarily something that I was 100% tying it to, but I did know, figuring out problems, designing new solutions, that was always part of, the appeal of mechanical engineering. And that's, a lot of what the engineers are doing, different disciplines of engineering are doing with the manufacturing groups. Ended up in where I did in engineering was almost more luck. I was out of school for a few months, hadn't gotten a job before I graduated, but back in the 90s, you didn't go out on Indeed and LinkedIn and apply for jobs. It was when you got desperate, you were sending out resumes cold. And that's what I was doing, trying to just hit up manufacturers in the area, honestly, and made contact with Mantis Cranes at the time down in Franklin, Tennessee, and started my career there. Just really fascinated with it at the time. I'd grown up on a farm, so, construction machinery and manufacturing didn't seem so foreign from, tractors and, occasionally you're welding on things to repair them and getting dirty and stuff like that. So to me, it didn't feel like something that was really all that odd or unique. And, it was just a product I fell in love with. And that's really what drove me through the first few years and really kept me there long term. Just, it was a great product, a lot of interesting problems, new ideas that you could incorporate, and new ways to make the product and the company better.
So you get to Mantis, your first job, you're sitting there, you're doing your engineering stuff. And how long did it take before the light went on and you said, hey, this manufacturing thing could actually be a good long-term career for me?
Like I said, once I got there and really started learning more about the day-to-day what it's like. I will say that, coming out of an engineering degree, you certainly don't learn everything you need to know when you start working. Every job's a little different. engineering, especially mechanical engineering, can be a very broad field. So, there's certainly a lot of things that you learn once you start the job. But, after a few months, I was like, I really love the problem solving, the being able to sort of dig in and investigate things and come up with solutions and, work with a lot of interesting people. The guys on the floor were always great. They had so much experience. They could always help, point you in the right direction, give you information that you needed to come up with, what was a good plan. They were usually pretty honest about telling you when it wasn't a great plan, which was also good for learning. But yeah, those are the kind of things that when you're young and starting your career and you're building experience, you need that ability to try things and see them succeed, but also see them, not work, fail on occasion and learn from them and figure out how to do better next time.
What would you say were the hardest parts of the job or parts that you didn't expect coming out of college and moving into an engineering role?
Mostly just the practicalities of engineering in real life, I guess I'll say. When you're doing a degree, it's all about making calculations for these sort of theoretical set conditions. And when you're faced with, a real life piece of equipment, it's not just, a simplified kind of structure or a simple fluid mechanics kind of case or something that you're looking at. You've got to say, all right, how can I take what I've learned in college and make this into something that really gives a practical solution instead of something that's not useful? It's more than just, solving the numbers. It's okay. It also has to be a solution that can be manufactured at a reasonable price that the customer wants, that really solves the problem, not just sort of covers whatever's going on. Those are the kind of things that I know came up almost immediately. Like, all right, that you have to start thinking about things in a different way than you did in college, but you have to use that experience that you gained with the engineering degree to sort of set up a process for how to solve problems. I think that's really what the engineering degree gave me. What was the most valuable thing that came out of my engineering degree. It's the structure for how to approach a problem, to define it, look at what's really the issues, break it down, and then sort of step through, what's a good process or what's a good improvement or solution. You don't always get that kind of real hands-on feel until you get out into business in the real world.
So I think you and I met very early on in your career, and I called on Mantis, and I'm familiar with a lot of the people over there. I know what the culture's like, and it's not a lot different than any other manufacturing organization. So, and I would imagine there were times that you sort of felt out of place or looked around and said, "There's nobody like me here," or something like that. And when you did that, what helped you keep going?
Yeah, there certainly was that. When I started, I think the engineering department there at Mantis was about 7 or 8 uh, with a manager, and I was the only female in the group. And, I was 23, 22, 23, coming straight out of college. Most of the guys were nearing retirement. So it was a really
Go
big deal.
ahead, say it. They were dinosaurs.
No, no, but
I
they
know
were
a couple
certainly
of those
quite a bit
guys.
older than me.
I know a couple of those guys.
And I really felt like their expectations for me weren't very high. But I, rem- there's one problem that I remember pretty clearly early on was it had to do with a hydraulic tank design and how we were going to do some baffling or something. And I think one of the guys gave it to me just to see what I would do, and I put some of that fancy fluid mechanics kind of calculations on stuff and came back to him with something, and he looked at it and said, that's not going to work, basically. And then that was about it, and kind of sent me on my way. And I remember going back to my desk and being frustrated and being kind of mad about it. And I sat there for a few minutes and I said, no, that's not, I'm not, I want to know why. That was always what drove me. I want to know why. I want to understand. So I went right back to him and said, okay, so tell me what you would do, or tell me, why this is wrong. Tell me how I should have looked at this. And I could see right then that he hadn't expected that. That he thought, okay, she'll go back over there and do whatever she's doing. But, I think that kind of approach started earning me respect with the team, that I was willing to dig in, that I was willing to ask questions, that I really did want to learn, that I wasn't going to be, overly sensitive about, them saying that's not right, because I wanted to be better. And that went a long way, with the team that was there.
Did you have a moment during that time or a realization where you said, I belong here? I know this is what I should be doing.
Yeah. Probably when I was probably after I'd been there 2 or 3 years, some of the older guys would start coming to me and saying, hey, what do we need to do next on this project? Or what do we need to do? They started looking to me for guidance, which really surprised me at the time. But I was like, okay, they trust me enough to believe that I know what's the right thing to do, what's the goals of the project, what's the next in the process. And, I guess I'll say maybe on a different aspect of that, the first time I saw one of my designs, larger designs for a crane project actually get built and see, something that's just on, Gina's screen at the time probably become, a 30-ton crane. And that was just really magic. It was still, one of those things that you remember years later.
Yeah, bringing everything together like that. What's something about being a woman in manufacturing that people outside the industry really wouldn't understand? Is there anything in particular that stands out to you there?
Think, I don't know whether it's kind of funny, I guess I'll say, is people remember your name.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Because, they don't meet a lot of women sometimes. And so even if you've forgotten their name, they're probably going to remember your name. So it does make you sort of memorable, and that's a good thing usually. I think there's a lot of opportunities. Certainly seen, well, I know for many years now, it's difficult to hire good people. It's difficult to find the right people for the positions that you've got open. And having, when it's having women candidates, added to that always, to me, is a benefit. It's a larger pool to draw from instead of, it's just, 50% of the population that's in, the pool because they're the only ones who have the experience and the knowledge and you know, are willing to put a resume out there. I think maybe something else to consider, we may have talked about in our last podcast, was women need to have more confidence to apply for jobs that maybe they don't think they 100% fit. Now they've been surveys and studies, men are much more likely to apply for jobs where they maybe or fit half the qualifications that are in the job posting versus women. Women will hesitate unless they hit, maybe 80 or 90%. Everybody needs to understand that, what's asked for in the job qualifications on a posting is an ideal. I have rarely ever hired anybody that checked every box on what I was looking for in a job posting. I mean, they don't exist. They're purple unicorns. But, you're looking for someone that has the right mindset, the right personality, the right fit, and the right skill set to do the job. And it doesn't mean that you specifically have to have purchased components for teleboom crawler cranes for 15 years or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of, I think good hiring managers look beyond, the very specifics of experience to how someone thinks about problems and solve problems and what skills they have that can apply to the position.
Have you had experiences that shaped how you approach your work or career specifically as a woman in the field?
That's a great question. Kind of don't know that I could put that into one experience. I mean, I think in some ways being a woman in the field is just inherently different, at least, starting where I did, in the 90s. I want to think it's better now. I certainly see signs of it, but I think I always approach things maybe different than I would have if I was a man. I was always more sensitive to how to build consensus, maybe more than, win the argument, if that makes sense. I've always looked at the problems and said, okay, this isn't about, one team winning over the other team, or, it's about, okay, we all have to do better and work better together in order to be successful. So I think that's probably, more fundamentally the way that I've always approached my positions. Alan, you're muted, I think, or I can't hear you.
Let me ask you this, Julie. What challenges do you think still exist for women in the manufacturing industry that don't get talked about? And this is a two-parter. What improvements have you seen since you started?
I mean, I think a lot of the challenges are now just, having women with experience that want the positions. I think it's like I mentioned with the job postings, it's the confidence to apply for it and to be involved in that and feel it and understanding that that's a valid path that's got a lot of potential, a lot of, opportunities for advancement and growth. I'm not going to say that there's still not the tendency to hire, may tend to still fall towards men, but truthfully, many times, when there's jobs posted, there's just no women that apply for them, at least for positions that I've had open. And it just, there's there's zero chance then that they're going to be hired for the position. I think things have improved, certainly since I started mine. I used to, early on in my management days when I was hiring someone, and this is maybe going back to the early 2000s or stuff. I know that some of the early hiring rounds, I would ask the guys that I got kind of to the final stages, do you have a problem working for a woman? And I never do that anymore. I don't think I've done it probably in 10 or 15 years because it's just, I don't think it even comes up as an issue anymore. Or maybe it doesn't seem like it's an issue in my mind. So I think the mindset certainly has shifted that, having women in higher positions, in management positions and more expected. It's not something that somebody's like, I don't think that's appropriate, but still would love to see more equity there between male and female in a lot of the positions that we have. But again, if women aren't going into the field, it makes it really difficult.
Would you say makes manufacturing environment welcoming to everyone?
It can be a real team experience, honestly. Producing a product, having a lot of common goals, and manufacturing does that. You've got the production schedule, you've got development schedules. It all has to come together. And as I've told teams and groups in the past, they don't succeed independently. Engineering isn't going to be successful because they've done their job and leave manufacturing behind. It's, internal struggles don't mean anything if you can't get the product out the door and if you aren't satisfying customer needs. So there has to be that team kind of spirit that's all right, all work together, all have some, common goals that we can use to pursue success. I think that brings a lot of, you get to meet a lot of different people and those kind of things. You get to value a lot of different types of experience. But I think that really adds value to the job, and that adds some diversity of thought, diversity of context.
Looking at your career, you were in manufacturing for a long time, construction. You went from engineer to CEO of the company you worked with, and then you left the construction equipment industry and got involved in some other things. And now you're back in the construction equipment industry. So what was it that brought you back to the industry, and what do you think makes it worth staying in the industry?
I just really love the industry. I that doesn't really answer the question. I spent 27 years in it with Nantis and then Tadano after they purchased that group. And, in my heart, it still feels like home in many ways. It was really interesting when I started this job at Hitachi that I'm currently in. I hadn't really done anything with excavators, wheel loaders before, but immediately coming into the position, it's got hydraulics. A lot of it is very similar to what I knew from my telescopic and crane days, and that immediately felt familiar and like something that I really enjoyed. I know how those pieces of equipment work. I know how customers think about pieces of equipment that are doing jobs like that. I understand what is important as far as making things nice for the operator, making the product perform well. So, some of it I think is comfort, just based on a lot of experience. But the people you meet in the industry are also really great. A lot of owners, dealers, they're good people. They're trying to take the equipment that we're producing. It's tools for them to make their business successful. And if you understand that and you want to work with them, it's a lot of fun, honestly.
Piece of advice, or what would you tell a young woman who is considering um, a career in manufacturing but isn't sure that's the route she wants to go?
Tell her to give it a try. Or at least, don't count it out as an opportunity. It's not all guys. It's not all, getting dirty on a manufacturing floor. Although, getting dirty on a manufacturing floor or getting dirty in the field is part of it sometimes. Depends on which industry you're in. But it has a lot of intricacies. It has a lot of different types of positions that are available within manufacturing. I mean, I chose engineering, which is maybe one of the, less common for women, but purchasing, HR, accounting. There's lots of different opportunities within manufacturing that aren't about, on the floor type of work, but are about, you know, the basics of manufacturing that need the support and the infrastructure.
Well, let me ask you this. For any manufacturing leaders that might be listening out there, what's the one thing they could do tomorrow that would make their workplace better for women or allow them to attract more women to manufacturing jobs?
I'll say that flexibility has always been an issue for women, especially, younger women coming into the jobs. When you reach that age where having kids, you've got to, and even, I guess, towards the end of your career, if you have older parents to take care of or other things like that going on, women are still tasked with a lot of caregiver roles in their real life. And I will equally say, though, that I think men are having flexibility drives them too. I think COVID really changed everyone's mindset there. And some hybrid work, being able to do work from home, all of that's a lot more valued than it used to be. Or I think everyone saw that it was possible. And so now it's maybe more in demand. Certainly some types of manufacturing jobs don't lend themselves well to that. But having the flexibility to work from home, work remotely, take care of things on a schedule that meets the needs of the rest of your life is really helpful. And I was really lucky in my career that my employers at the time were able to grant me some of that. But if you've got a really rigid, I have to be there every day and there's no flexibility kind of thing, and you wake up in the morning and your kid's sick or, something else is going on, it's just, there's no real argument about what you're going to take care of. The family has to be supported.
Right.
Not making that a penalty for working, I think, is really important, male and female.
Julie, we appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks,
It's great
Carolyn.
having you on again and ahead of Con Expo. I
Yes.
think it was the last podcast you had the great story about Con Expo.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's been a long time ago now, so maybe no repeats of that this year.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. You'll have to come back and let Alan
Yeah.
and I know how it went.
Yeah. Con Expo debrief.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Con Expo. Great to be there with Hitachi Group this year. It should be a great show for us. We're looking forward to showcasing some new machines, some new technology. Really exciting.
Great. Hey, thanks again, Julie.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Alan.
Travel safe.
Thanks.